right. Welcome, everyone. This is Ravi Shankar, and this is ISOBREAK 13. I'm speaking to you from Providence, Rhode Island. Here, and it's a practice I like very much. I would like to acknowledge the original stewards of this land, which are the Narragansett people, one of the 5 indigenous North Americans who are here in New England. And we have a very exciting, rich, diverse array of readers today from around the world, from Philippines, from Australia, from the US. And so I'm so glad that you can join us. Last session, Tim Tomlinson filled in admirably. I had my rotator cuff surgery, but I'm feeling better. And so let me just, I'll just bring everyone on screen for a second. And then, we have here Roland Tolentino from Manila, Adam Aitken from Sydney, Leo from Baguio, Tanya James from DC, though she's not there now, and Deb Luthra from Boston. And so as we are reading, as you probably know, those of you who are fans of ISOBREAK, please feel free to put in comments, a little bit of applause, whatever you like. And at the end of our session together, we'll have a chance for Q&A, and we'll hear from all of these writers. So thank you again. Isolation Break, of course, is a co-production of the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and the New York Writers Workshop. And we have a special partner this session, which is the Chu Center at George Mason University. So I want to thank all of our sponsors and for all of you for being here. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our next reader, who I love very much, who was just reading at the Chu Center and had some technical difficulties, but sounds much clearer now. So I'm so excited to hear Faye. Faye Olayo, writer, performer, storyteller. Her poetry has transported her to various events and stages in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia. She's a member of the writers collective Ubag Cordera Young Writers and the Baguio Writers Group, and also the co-creator and co-host of the Little Brown Podcast, a podcast about Indigenous experiences in the homeland and in the diaspora. And Faye recently released her first album of spoken word, which you can get on our website, Body of Work, a meditation on trauma and healing. So welcome, Faye. It's so good to have you.
It's so nice to see you again, Ravi. Thank you so much. So yes, again, thank you to APWT. Thank you to the Alan Cheuse Writer Center. Thank you to the New York Writers Workshop. Thank you for everyone who is spending their time, their evening, their morning with us. So I will be reading some poems for you tonight. The first poem that I'm reading is my signature poem, and it's the first track from the recently released poetry album entitled Body of Work. So this is entitled Magic. Perhaps the most magical thing I've ever done is to live, to be woman in a world that keeps telling me, give up, it's too difficult. Perhaps the most magical thing I've ever done is to be daughter, to come from a line of martyrs, of battered wives and abused children. Perhaps the most magical thing I've ever done was to heal. I'm starting to believe that to cure trauma is to go back in time, to exhume the dead, to unearth the gods of my ancestors, to stitch my great-grandfather's head back into place, to unbirth my grandmother's second husband, to unwed my mother, or at least to give my father softer hands. Perhaps the most magical thing I've ever done is to survive men, to have been rehabilitation center for boys addicted to their own ego, drunk off their own toxic masculinity, to have been both therapist and couch for all their unresolved issues, to have been a halfway house, build them up to be men for the next woman. Perhaps the most magical thing I've ever done is to love anyway. At the departure hall in Muraray, I am kissing a man I could have easily given my heart to if we weren't flying off to different countries. His mouth unfolds my lips into a spell. It freezes the entire airport. The carousels of luggage are brought to an abrupt halt. All the babies stop crying. The plane is stuck to the runway like gum on the bottom of a flight attendant's stiletto. We let go and open our eyes to time catching up. The passenger is already in line at the boarding gate. The man beside us, an uncomfortable witness, shuffles in his seat and asks, "Is it true love?" It isn't. It's just magic. The second poem I'm reading is another poem from the album Body of Work, which you can listen to on Bandcamp. This is called A History of Brown Bodies. A history of brown bodies. The body as object. Museum, artifact, ethnographic study, the body as abject. Exposition, attraction, human zoos, cultural performers, the body as subject. Little brown brother, unchristianized savage, dead amigo, the body as tool, an extension of a weapon, marching uniforms buried in a flag, the body as evidence, a canvas of wounds in shades of blue, blood trickling a river across flesh, the body as absent, the missing, the unmarked graves, the disappeared, the body as protest, this inherited struggle, this fight in the veins, the skin, the skin, the skin. And my last poem, which I will leave you with, is a poem that is going to be part of the next collection. This is a poem, well, the next collection is going to be an exploration on my Indigenous identity and the conversations that I've been having with my mother about my grandmother. So it is entitled This Land. This land was never ours to begin with. This land was here before we could give it a name it gave us in return. It gave us gods in return. Where we come from will always be this land. And hasn't it already been said, it is arrogant to say that you own which outlives you? These boundaries we made meant responsibility, meant care and protection, meant communal, meant obligation. Soon, empires came to teach us the language of property. Soon, boundaries meant titles, meant claims and ancestral domains, meant allotment and government, meant national sacrifice zones and colonial heritage sites, meant agricultural reform. Soon, this language became our words to our world, to my province is known as a one product, one town land. A decade ago, a rise of suicide cases was attributed to the growing availability of commercial pesticide. See how toxins seep into the body the way it does to the earth. My grandparents were one of the first farmers in Madayman. My grandmother tilled the soil to feed the village that fed her children, that feeds me. And when she passed, she was given back to the land. Her body lies in this land as offering. See how the only way we can take is by replenishing. Hers was a season of seeds. Now I try to unearth what we were taught to forget. The way we nurture our bodies and each other, the way we fight to keep our traditions alive, the way we make our medicine. Mine will be a season of tending. What I won't forget is that this body belongs to this land. My healing is healing this land. My growth is to nourish this land. And when the season of reaping comes, I'll know that this body is nurtured. I'll know that this harvest is for all that came before and for all that will come after. This land is not ours, but ours to take care of. When it is my time to return, all I can do is sow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Faye. Oh.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And it was so clear and great to hear you this time. So we'll be having a conversation. I really want to find out more about the Little Brown podcast. So I hope you will talk to you about that. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Faye.
Thank you.
Those of you that are just joining us, welcome. I'm Ravi Shankar. This is ISOBREAK 13, Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and New York Writers Workshop co-production with another special partner of this iteration, which is the Chu Center and International Writers Center at George Mason University. And we get going every month. We didn't think that we would still be in isolation when we started this over a year ago, but here we are. But this has been one of the lifelines for many of us, is listening to all of this great work from around the world. And it is my special privilege to introduce a good friend and local writer, Dev Luthra. Dev has been the artistic director of And Still We Rise, which is a theater company committed to the empowerment of prisoners and former prisoners' voices since 2007. And he has created, staged, toured original productions at various venues all over from Eastern Massachusetts, Boston College, Northeastern, and he's taught as part of BU's prison education program and run theater groups at Bay State Correctional Center and facilitated theater intensives in Boston, and also co-wrote a book, Macbeth's Children, which won an AATE New Play Award. He's also a terrific actor and director, which I can attest to. His directing credits include Shanley's Doubt, a Parable, the New Hampshire Theater Project, and the revival of the Underground Railroad Theater's Alice's Adventures Underground. And while he is white presenting, he's a person of color, of actually Indian and European descent, and has a play. I'm hoping maybe we'll hear a little section of it, Secret Asian Man, premiering this year, which is about that bi-ethnic heritage. So thank you so much for joining us, Dev. I'm really happy that you could be here.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm very grateful to be with everyone on this morning, evening, midday, whatever the time is, wherever you are. So I'm going to read a selection of poems. Yeah, there's not much I want to say about them. I'm just going to read them. So here we go. This first one is entitled Fond Hope. We make things in the fond hope that they will take us to the place we imagine faultless and free. A place where socialism is no longer necessary, where all the people and the trees and animals and creatures, seen and unseen, the fire and the air, the water and the earth know each other in the biblical sense. And we are puzzled at the dislocation we feel as our bodies try to stretch themselves through time and space, unreasonable, to a place that only exists in our minds. We are not the metaphor to some unknowable God. We are the reality we seek, as real as rock and space and stars, as real as trees, water and rotting leaves, as real as the carcass of a starved wolf, as real as eggs, dirt, and the smell of burning. This next one is called Anger. It's hard for me to tell the difference between anger and shame. I feel the same heat in the skin of my head and the power, energy surging down my neck to my back. My eyes widen and my voice calls on the words I want, need to say. They're words that smash and pulverize and also stab with a clarity and passion I feel at home with and in. But that is only the beginning. She started to explain. I cut her off. My eyes glare, yes, glare, like the Gorgon did, like Medusa. I'm Kali-filled, and if I could, I would reduce her to a pile of ashes with my glance. I know the stories. I'm multi-armed and multi-faced, twirling a mace, a spear, a litany of words to wrap around her, like a bolo around the legs of a steer. I have done. She walks away. I stand there feeling myself return from the realm of the gods to me and my world, my small matchstick world. I wake up to myself as if I just returned from a voyage to Antarctica. I am exhausted and small. And the little boy waits for a cup of sweet something and a bun. He waits. He waits. This next piece is a series of, it's a triptych of 3 poems about entering the body of someone else. This is something I do a lot as an actor, you know, embodying a character, but I've also had this experience in other contexts. So here we go. This is called Entering the Body. His father died from a fall in the bathtub, concussed and drowned, his face severely disfigured, so much so, it seems, that they didn't allow him to see his father's body, his face, before they took him away. All he had was that absence, that hole in the air around him, that hole in the fabric of the house. The house was a home to his father, which he visited on occasion to remember. Not yet knowing why, he climbed the stairs up to the bath Daddy died in. He drew the curtain and, fully clothed, lay himself down in the tub, his body shaping itself to that mortal disaster, that hard knock, and the gradual realization that there was no way back but death. His body shapes itself to a slow death, sharp and throbbing head and futile gulping for air. Father and son, a little closer together. He will die one day too. Now perhaps he is a little more open to that certainty. The ritual circle coalesces like a dog circling a warm hearth before it settles, rounding its body, Ouroboros-like, connecting all these movers and seers. And he too accepts the invitation to see and to move, focusing his attention on the sensation of his body in space engaged with the floor. He still remembers when he first saw the picture in the book. Bury my heart at Wounded Knee. It was the frozen body of Spotted Elk, chief of the Miniconjou, killed at the massacre, yes, at Wounded Knee. And as his body entered the body, the frozen dead body of the killed elder, his skin prickled and spoke. All at once his muscles and bones were called to remember the unjust death of thousands, the mourning cries, the eyes glistening, staring at him. Oh yes, all that is with him now. Unknowing is not. Keep your head down. The phrase, 4 words long, works on his back and neck. His body mind opens to the weight, shape, and direction of the words. He makes his head heavy. His upper eyelid, specifically, he calls on lead to weigh down any impulse, to see, to judge, to protest. He flattens the soles of his feet so they grind and pool into the dirt under him. Dirt that swallows the blows and high-pitched calls of a people avoiding dismemberment and a slow crumbling. His eyes are fixed on the ground, boring with all their will into each square inch of soil he treads on. His ears and nose and tongue, however, can still smell, taste, and hear above, behind, to each side. The smell and taste and sound of the grist milled the handle turned deliberately and relentlessly by the hand that feeds him. Scraps and fat and the feet of pigs. He slow cooks for hours and hours, listening to his belly growl. His spine, bent as it is, remembers what it is to stand tall, head scraping the sky. Each cell of his flesh and ligaments, of his nerves and nails, the very neurons covet and cosset the knowledge of a strange and station, of a strength and station, of an assertion of his own dignity and power, his capacity to love himself and others and the very stones and trees, his beloved and loving ones. All right, the last piece I'm going to read it's about secrets, about what's not spoken. The secrets hulk over us like dripping fat, ghosting us, pooling to puddled oil, slipping and sliding. No one can keep our feet. Ghosts storing the past, staring out of our faces. In my heart, ears that feed on the past. But it is never all past, is it? The ghosts slough off into the darkness and smells of dirty clothes and spices, into the damp mist of the cement floor of a jury-rigged shower behind the kitchen. Batteries of pots and pans loom over me too, daring me to say anything. My voice melts like the ghee my grandmother cooks with. She is silent too. No, not silent. She rattles the bones of family disasters, stars tilting out of center like broken boats marooned on some dead beach. We roast in the dark sun. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Dev Luthra. Thank you, Dev. And at the Q&A, hopefully we'll hear a little bit more. There's a performance of And Still We Rise planned for later this year. Maybe you could tell us about that. Excellent. Wow. What a auspicious beginning to a morning here and evening wherever you are. I'm Ravi Shankar. This is ISOBREAK 13, APWT and NYWW co-production. And you're just hearing, if those of you who are interested, Asia Pacific Writers and Translators is a network of writers from around the world who have an interest in the region. So you don't have to be from there, but we do things like Isolation Break and of course have published an anthology, Meridian, which is actually rapidly selling out. So you should get your copy if you're interested. And next up, I'm really excited to have Roland Tolentino, who is a faculty member from the University of Philippines Film Institute and the former dean of UP College of Mass Communications. He has taught at Osaka University and National University of Singapore, and his research interests include Philippine literature, popular culture, cinema, media, interfacing national and transnational issues, and he writes fiction, creative nonfiction, and is a fellow of the UP Institute of Creative Writing and a member of the Filipino Film Critics Group. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the Tagalog, but I hope that Roland will be able to. And I just heard him speak at the Choose Center, really profound talk. So thank you for that, Roland, and welcome.
Thanks, Ravi. And thank you to the Choose residency program and the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators Group for inviting us. I will be reading two excerpts. No? The first one is from an experimental short story I did, an original written in Filipino and translated in English by Luisa Igloria. At the corner of Annapolis and Aurora, version 1. A man stood staring out from under the no jaywalking sign. Outside McDonald's, a vendor vigorously fanned embers upon which she roasted rows of IUD, PAL, helmet, Walkman, and Adidas, barbecued chicken parts or cut meats, ingeniously nicknamed after the strange fusion of shapes and cultural symbols they evoked in the popular imagination. Entrails, wings, chicken heads, rubbery chicken feet. The fragrant odors stirred together in someone's pot of rice gruel wafted up. Newly hatched eggs or uniformed chicks, if you like, would soon fry and later to splutter merrily and accompanied of sauteed onions and vinegar. The apples, 5 pesos each, no touching but sniffing aloud, drowsed in their boxes, as did the lanzones, half a kilo, 12 pesos each, one tiny fruit to sample. Mandarin oranges, 20 a kilo, one orange free, with every kilo purchase huddled together. Even the translucent beads of sago or tapioca had swirled down with the strips of buko or young coconut through the torpid layers of liquid to the bottom of their containers. It was almost 10 p.m. It was waiting patiently for the last full show, not wanting to go home just yet. Some 3-year-old, as he surmised, not much taller or wider than ukuleles, were shouting in mimicry of older people around them, "Quiapo, Soria, Libertad." It seemed as though the crowd were a swarm of flies that had chosen to land on the rear end of the jeep, and the less fortunate who were unable to board the jeepney stood patiently waiting for the next one headed for Montalban. They looked like slaves roped into a line. "You there, the pregnant dame in red." Everyone turned to look. "You can't cross the street now. What were you doing? You should have stayed home. Your husband's probably looking for you in your 9th month and still gallivanting. Don't blame me if you go into labor right now," yelled the policeman coarsely from his yellow pork battalion outpost. And to the rushing jeepneys, he motioned straight ahead to those for EDSA and Marikina bound. The traffic sped, trailing its souvenirs of black smoke. Outside McDonald's, the Praise the Lord group continued to sing "Jesus is Alive," while their white-shirted, close-neck members circled the waiting crowds, holding out their white donation bags. Across McDonald's, strains of James Taylor's song issued from the speakers of Cafe Aurora. Passers-by could see the band, the singers' backs reflected on glass. From the speakers planted on the sidewalk poured the lyrics, "I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I thought it would never end. There were times I could not find a friend. I always thought that I'd see you, baby, one more time again." People pressed closer to the glass, nearly oblivious to the fact that the anonymous hips might be welded too suggestively, erotically close to each other. They looked through the window as they might stare entranced at exotic fish swimming in a huge aquarium. Just when a newsboy came by, brandishing newspapers bearing the headline, "3 die from lambada." Sensing a new diversion, heads craned his way. 3 males drunk, of course, who knows, from San Miguel Beer or Red Horse Beer na Beer, emerging from Alibangbang Cultural Center alias Alibangbang Pub, crossed on the threshold of McDonald's, and there, smack in the middle of its open doorway, its widely welcoming arc spewed forth a thick and grainy congee of violent sunflower yellow liquid before linking arms and once more reeling down the way down the street. The second excerpt I will read is motivated by the current reality. The Philippines has the longest and strictest lockdown in the world, beginning on March 15, 2020. And nearing 2 years, it still has to grapple with a primarily medical response to the pandemic health emergency. Only some 16% of the adult population is fully vaccinated, and there is still no systematic contact tracing or mass testing. The default response has always been regional and citywide lockdowns, curfews, liquor bans, and military checkpoints. Face-to-face protests were not allowed or are not allowed. Face masks and face shields were required for public and interior places. And of course, there were restrictions for mobility with just the designated member, one per household, allowed to go out for essentials. Children, minors, seniors, especially age 70 and up, are prohibited in public places, and yet the number of infections and deaths continue to rise. The University of the Philippines Institute of Creative Writing, came up with a journal, DX Machina, Philippine Literature in the Time of COVID-19, which I edited its volumes 2 and 3. Available online, so with the other links to the webinars and other online publications. I write fictions and essays in Filipino, the national language, and the portion I will read is in English. This is from my introduction of volume 2. What have we been doing, or what has the government done that seem not to fully grapple with the pandemic, or what has it not done? For us, writers and citizens, what we have been doing during the months and months of the lockdown. On the one hand, the benchmark for living seems to be just wellness. Even though still difficult, with massive poverty in the country and mental health issues intensified in the ongoing lockdown, the default is just not to get sick, not to be infected with the virus. And on the other hand, well-being, or ginhawa in Filipino, the sustenance of a quality of life and living seems to have been lost in the pandemic health emergency. Most writers got soaked in the lockdown moment, debilitated and angry at the government's response. Their works will come out in retrospect when the things have simmered and in better time can yield a more conducive context in the writing of the pandemic. But some rarer writers, they chose to write ATM, or at the moment, seizing the lockdown days, wrestling the conditions of survival and struggle in the everyday in their writing. The way things are a boss on social media, writers and artists have been continuously producing their art online even, and have been in the forefront for the clamor for change in the way collective things and life are in the pandemic. Writing literature and the creative processes, even just cooking, gardening, online selling, and recalling memories, among others, are essentials to navigating this pandemic. What the pandemic has shown is how fucked up our system is, even before the pandemic. The government's historical misprioritization and ill-preparedness in providing affordable and efficient health care for all have only been magnified by the government's ill response in the pandemic. Social distancing needs to be maintained physically, but also social solidarity through creative and critical use, and content in social media at this time needs to be in the forefront of things. I question the new normal if it is just going to be the maintenance of an even more corrupt system after the pandemic. Through protests from home and social distancing protests in the safe spaces of the University of the Philippines and the Commission on Human Rights, the reclaiming of protest spaces in Menjola, Manila, and other cities, and writing amidst the pandemic are real, creative, and critical renditions of how we, the people, and the nation want and should live. Protests and writing become platforms for reclaiming the vestiges of the quality of life of the old normal and the needed interrogation of this even more fascistic and pro-establishment new normal. Magsulat, lumikha, makibaka, wag matapot. Dare to struggle, dare to create, dare to defy, dare to write, dare to win. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Roland. And what a range, the essayistic with the short story. And there was a comment here that Luis y Gloria is a terrific translator. I agree. So thank you. We'll hear from Rolando in a second. Those of you that are joining us, we're just halfway through ISOBREAK 13. It's been a terrific start. Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, which you can find out more at apwriters.org. And the New York Writers Workshop. And I should mention, I just heard a rumor that the New York Writers Workshop may be having an immersive writing workshop in Greece next year. So keep your ears on the airwaves. A little birdie has told me that might be the case. We're halfway through, and again, it's so great to see our next guest, Adam Aitken, who last I saw in Sydney, and he was saying it was 3 years ago. I think it might have been 2, but regardless, it's been way too long. Adam Aitken is someone else who works in multiple genres. He was born in London. He spent his early childhood in Thailand and Malaysia. He's been a recipient of the Australia Council Paris Studio Residency and was visiting distinguished professor at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. Some interesting stories about his time in Hawaii. He may have burned down the house, but I'm not quite sure. He co-edited the Contemporary Asian Australian Poets Anthology, and his memoir, a terrific memoir, kind of epistolary in nature, 100 Letters Home, was published in 2016 and shortlisted for the ASAL Gold Medal. And Archipelago, his latest collection of poetry, was shortlisted for the Kenneth Slessor Award and the Prime Minister's Literary Award in 2018. And excitingly, he has a new collection coming out with Giramondo, one of Australia's finest small presses, called Revenants. And I suppose that will be out pretty later this year, Adam?
Yeah, later this year, probably next year, actually, next month.
Oh,
next
terrific.
Month.
Welcome. Please take it away, Adam. It's great to see you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ravi, and thanks to Asia Pacific Writers Network. It's been very supportive of me, and it's helped us Australian writers connect with the rest of the world, which has always been our problem. So for different reasons. So I'm reading a few poems from Revenants, and I'm playing Revenants in French. Revenant is the return of the zombies or the return of the ghosts. So it's a book about very much not epistolary, but certainly about recovering memory, and as Faye said, memory is healing, or trying to remember can be a path to healing yourself and your connection with your family or with your country or your heritage. Okay, the first one's at the beginning of the book. It's me imagining my father as a young man. He's a white man who's just got a job in Hong Kong in 1956. Cognac and cigars. I'm standing alone in the northeast monsoon, and the whole nation misses me. My cup needs filling. Instant noodles, window shut, aircon on, Kowloon patterns, tea-dipped clouds, smog sunset. Your view in 56 above the throng, all your past, my past, lost in letters. You got drunk in 57, fell in love in 58. At the Foreign Correspondence Club, you wagered on a horse with an Irish name. The stake was cognac and cigars. Last week, you swapped the lucky digger's hat, your grandfather's, for Dutch clogs. No luxury you can't have. You push a button. I imagine myself as you. And a boy runs into the room, lighter at the ready. The next two are very short, and they're called Revenants. So Revenants 1 and Revenants 2. And these are, there's a whole section of the book set in a small village in France, where I spend some time. I try to when I can. Revenants, ghosts of the churchyard who died too young, come back as boys and girls in peasant clothes in the window of the widow. Revenants 2. She was lost like the god of insomnia who invented for herself a friend. Herself, that other self who slept without a voice, found me in my dream and imprinted herself. She looked back at me across a battlefield of ash through the eyes of a creature I had not seen for 400 years, and that was enough. The draining of the lake. This is more or less an account of a a bit of massive gardening I saw in Kuala Lumpur many years ago when I was an artist in residence. My patron decided he'd just drain his massive lake, and all the fish came out of there. The draining of the lake, perhaps they were offspring of the carp I saw before your time, catfish and hybrids flapping and gasping on the lake's mud-slick floor, their numbers swollen through concupiscence. They had hidden away, having it off under the surface of the murk. But the day they drained the lake, my world emptied of their gilded character, the haughty carp and humble mullet gazing on the muddy edges of the lake. Gasping on the muddy edges of the lake. How else to watch how hundreds, parents and juveniles, could go belly up and bursting in resplendent Selangor. The servants pushing brooms across the sludge and goo. What else to do that day but watch the maids gathering up the semi-dead and dying in wicker baskets, a writhing haul of gold, pink and mutant browns, certain to flood the night market, nothing undersize, some as long as baby sharks. The boss had ordered the purging. The fish had overswum their welcome. A guy in Wellington's, the caretaker, patient with the task, was scraping back the ooze. You, the resident artist, sketching someone's hand on a terrace. Though no one made much art that day, we had no choice but to draw decorous ornaments of nature turning back to food, and this orient made plain this harvest time. Crowd control, no refraction or reflection in that sludge, no glint, no bright-eyed darling to be seen as we leaned over the balustrades. The smell, an equatorial tang of salt and decay. The fish looked up, bewildered, gulping on a suffocating air, their mouths all ooh and ah, eyes rolling in their heads. Before they grayed, no sentiment or beauty. The end, or the beginning, I could not say. And I'll finish with a poem about my half-brother, my father's second wife's son, who I love very much, and he is my other. I call him my pilgrim brother. My other reminds me of a Viking prince piloting a hot air balloon in central desert cumulus. Currency, lad, come good. No need to spend his rent on a nicked beamer. His old mates take the prize for mayhem. I see him barefoot in the weekend market selling silver charms. He does it charmingly. In lordiness, he has taken up a device. Though it burns his fingers, he can't give up. Sleepless all night, he sleeps post-noon in a director's fold-up chair in a quiet style that impresses everyone. But on waking, nothing's guaranteed. In a remake of Ned Kelly, military talents, the portraitist finds an Irish lilt in our genes, in his grey-blue eyes. He slaves hard for a rest on Sunday. A statistical diversity, a fishing rod with a kelpie on long-term love, slathering for a chase, a bone, a biscuit. Winters, he works another 50 mutts for cash in some western desert town, fond of trailing afterthoughts. Posthuman? Maybe. My little bro, chewing a chip or an apple 5,000 feet in the air. His mother held him a long while and turned the key. Fluent as a green leaf in a local forest, total strangers embrace him in the park. In his garden and within its sky gardens of recall, he sees a beach down there in Lake Eyre, invented just for him. He will never grow sad even without me. He prefers to laugh. He finds it easy. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Adam.
Ravi.
And these are all forthcoming in Revenant?
Yep, they're all in the book.
Terrific. All right, and now we're on to our final reader of the morning / afternoon and evening. Those of you that are just joining us, again, I'm Ravi Shankar. This is ISOBREAK, APWT New York Writers Workshop, and Choose Center collaboration, which is very important because our next writer comes from George Mason University. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to Tanya more because I feel like Tanya was in DC and at Columbia, as was I. So I think we have some interesting mirrored experiences. But Tanya James is the author of 3 works of fiction. Most recently, the novel The Tusk That Did the Damage came out with Knopf and was named the best book of 2015 by the San Francisco Chronicle, The Guardian, and National Public Radio, and shortlisted for the International Dylan Thomas Prize. Her short stories have appeared in Freeman's, Granta, One Story, Oxford American, The New Yorker, and other venues. And she currently is an associate professor and teaches in the MFA program at George Mason University. So thank you so much for joining us, Tanya. Welcome.
Thank you, Ravi. Hi, everybody. Hello from Jackson Heights, Queens. It's such an honor to be reading with all of these writers from around the world who I mean, it's 8 a.m.-ish here, and I was tired, but now I feel rejuvenated just listening to everybody. I'm going to read a very short story. I had a bit of a obsession with the Indiana Jones franchise when I was a kid. And like many South Asian Americans and maybe South Asians around the world, I was particularly interested in the second movie of the trilogy because it was set in India, supposedly, for better or worse. And so I watched it as a kid, and I guess it took me several decades to respond. So this story is my response. This is called The South Asian Speakers Series Presents Archaeologist and Adventurer Indiana Jones. But if you ask me, said Indiana Jones, it belongs in a museum. He paused to let that sink in. He was sitting on stage across from the moderator, an Indian woman whose name he'd failed to catch. Her legs were crossed at the knee, the legs he'd remember. He reached for the glass of water on the tiny table between them and sipped. The moderator uncrossed her legs and shifted to face the audience. Let's pause here and take some questions. He followed her gaze to the masses, overflowing into the aisles, lined up along the walls. For the first time that evening, he tried to distinguish faces. Many of them were colored, faces of color. Not a bad thing. His best friend was Egyptian. A microphone was passed to the first questioner, a brown-skinned man. Thank you for your talk, Dr. Jones. I'm wondering about the Indian village, the one that sent you on your quest to retrieve a mystical stone. The Shankara stone, correct, Indy said. The villagers sent me to retrieve it and save their kidnapped children from a demonic cult. I was just wondering what the village was called. I don't remember. You don't remember? I'd just ridden a raft down a waterfall. You'll forgive me if I don't remember the name of a village. Indy gave a lopsided grin. I believe it was Mayapur, the moderator filled in, consulting her notes. That's it, Mayapur, Indy said. And the leader of the village was named Shaman. Shaman, the questioner said, just shaman. Correct. So if I went to this Mayapur and I went around asking for a guy named Shaman, people would be like, yeah, Shaman lives over on, I don't know, Cherokee Street. Look, pal, I don't know what your problem is. My problem is that all these names sound made up. All names are made up, Indy said. Hey, I was named after my pet dog. Some people laughed. Indy prompted the next question. It came from a pretty woman in a clingy skirt. Hi, Dr. Jones, she said. And as she went on, he found himself recalling a student, a girl from his teaching days. You mentioned that at the Maharaja's banquet, you were served a dessert of chilled monkey brains? He nodded, still thinking of the student who used to sit in the front row of his history class. Once, on her eyelids, she'd written him a message. Love on the right lid and you on the left. Some say this idea of Asians eating monkey brains is an urban legend based on a misunderstanding of the Chinese hao tao gu, which translates to monkey head mushroom. Could it be that you ate monkey head mushroom soup? It's a Manchurian dish. Indy recalled the way his former student had closed and opened her eyes. Love you, love you. It was sort of disgusting to think of her writing on her own eyelids, but kind of amazing too. What wouldn't she do? Dr. Jones, the questioner said. Indy looked to the moderator, who was also looking at him, illegibly. I just ate what I was told to eat, he said. Silence. He took a long gulp of water. The world had grown unfriendly to his form of research. What he wouldn't give to be back in the jungles of Honduras or jumping trains across Nazi-occupied Europe where he could let his whip do the talking. He'd taken this gig for the honorarium mainly. For the final question, the moderator pointed to a woman with billowing black hair. Mr. Jones, she said, already annoying him, for he had a PhD, how would you respond to the claim that you're more of a gravedigger than an archaeologist? And is there merit to the argument that these relics belong not in European museums, but in the places they've been looted from? You know what, Indy said, I have a couple of questions. Have you been whipped and force-fed the blood of Kali? Have you been crippled by a voodoo doll? I did all that, not for myself, but for the villagers of that village and their children. I'm the good guy here, not the bad guy. Dr. Jones, the moderator said. The question had to do with looted objects. Well, guess what? The joke's on you. His voice trailed off. He was thinking of the Holy Grail, the cup of the King of Kings, falling out of his grasp, tumbling into a chasm beneath the Temple of the Sun. And wasn't it always like that? Hadn't every object he'd ever loved finally eluded him, vanishing even further into the vault of history? Quietly, he said, I've never put anything in a museum. He looked at the floor. The general murmur was excruciating. Eventually, he heard the gentle voice of the moderator. Indiana, Indiana. Her tone sounded so much like his father's right then. He looked into her warm brown eyes. Indy, we brought you here to talk. I am talking. No, so that we could talk to you. She gave him a sympathetic smile. Indy, the truth is, many of us find you very heroic and very sexy. But this India mission is confusing. On the one hand, we're flattered. On the other hand, we're angry. It's just a circle that's hard to square, you know? Indy sighed. He knew. Things had gotten weird in India. Deep down, he had always known. Can we agree, Indy, that India was a misstep? That you should stick with fighting Nazis? Theoretically, sure, but the Nazi party is defunct. And yet, there are still Nazis. There will always be Nazis. He frowned, suspicious. As he looked out at the audience, he could see waves of nodding faces, confirming the ever-presence of Nazis. His gaze fixed on the red exit sign, glowing like the fiery Shankara stones. Well then, he said, I guess I've got work to do. He reached down beneath his chair and retrieved the fedora he'd stored behind his ankles all this time, the hat that had seen him through every adventure, and set it on his head. He got up and jogged sideways down the stairs. As he made his way down the center aisle, people began to clap, uncertainly at first. It didn't matter. He was grateful. They had saved him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I am so glad that you wrote that. And that is actually going to be the perfect segue, I think. I'll bring everyone else back in to the conversation here. Thank you all for joining us. That was ISOBREAK 13. And I wanted to say, and maybe I grew up in Manassas, Virginia, which potentially is even a little less cosmopolitan than where Tanya grew up. And when that movie came up, I remember, you know, hearing from the kids about the snake eyes and the monkey brains and feeling quite nonplussed. And and kind of angry because I'd been to India and I knew that was no representation. So maybe, and I know that actually Deb also has kind of written about this idea of being a secret Asian man, and Adam has kind of been bicultural most of his life, and so maybe we could start the conversation there. I mean, well, Tanya, do you want to kind of talk about the genesis of that story a little bit, and then we can talk a little bit about identity, bicultural identity?
I just have to correct you, Ravi, because I grew up in Kentucky, so I don't know. We are probably in a similar level of cosmopolitanism.
We have Lorena Bobbitt and the Battle of Bull Run.
I didn't know Lorena. Okay. Well, anyway, I think when you grow up with so few touchstones, cultural touchstones in pop culture, you just like glom onto the ones that are there, and even if they are sort of problematic or inconsistent, you still become obsessed with them, or at least I became obsessed with. Like, for example, there was this movie. I can't remember the name of it. It had this robot named Johnny Five, Short Circuit. And there was this Indian scientist who I thought was Indian. And I thought, you know, his name was Ben Javeri or something. And he was played by Fisher Stevens. He was played by a white actor, but I didn't know. So I felt like more attached to that movie, even if you know, it really was kind of offensive. And I just, you know, I seized on those things. And so I seized on Temple of Doom. And as sickening as certain parts were, there was still some kind of thrill and attachment there. So I can't say I just, you know, hated it or I was outraged at the time. Like, this arose from the more complicated space of affection plus just disturbance. So I also feel like, you know, the shorter forms of prose are given to kind of voice-driven and odd, you know, experiments for me. And so I really have been enjoying taking breaks from my novel with like short stories and just kind of having fun for a few days, and then, you know, going back to the behemoth I'm trying to work on.
And it's interesting. It was in a moment where, you know, Mahatma Gandhi is being played by Ben Kingsley.
Right.
I mean, so there weren't a lot of representations of South Asians at all. And so there is this complicated relationship. Adam, do you want to kind of speak a little bit to this? Because you have such an interesting background.
It's my whole life. Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I'm a bit unusual for an Asian Australian, because I was born in London. My father's was born in Melbourne, and my mother's born in Bangkok. But I came to Australia at the end of just about 1969, when the White Australia policy was being abolished. But of course, any official move to say something's just abolished doesn't abolish racism or anything like that.
Okay.
So the next few years was a struggle for me as a boy at school to either, you know, in that time my mother and I were quite rare, you know, that now there's lots of Asian Australian migrants and children of Asian migrants. So my visibility when I was a child was quite obvious, but, you know, I didn't actually feel different until other people made me feel different. And anyone who's been in a predominantly monocultural place and doesn't come from that place originally will feel that, you know. So being secret, it's interesting, and it became something that was an asset, obviously, as a writer in the 80s when I got out of university. I realized that Australians were really interested in my life, or about their multiculturalism. So it's odd, you know. I went from being a pariah, abject, to a voice.
And we can maybe talk about it, but probably a voice that had certain expectations put on it, perhaps.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, in my thesis, I write about novels written by Asian Australians, which struggle with the idea of the model migrant. I think a lot of the themes are the same in Asian American literature. Model migrants, daughters struggling with their parents, trying to be different, but holding on to some heritage, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now it's even getting more complex for various reasons. I think technology.
Dev, maybe, I mean, because you, of course, are working on this one-man show, Secret Asian Man, and it's interesting to me that it's kind of taken you to this long to work on it, and it seems like such an essential and integral conversation that you're having with yourself and the world. I mean, do you want to speak to this experience a little?
Well, what I'm stuck with is that I have the experience of constantly being required to leave part of myself outside in whatever context I'm in. You know, my relationship with my father's family is very fraught because I feel like my father's family is of Indian descent, you know, the Indian part of me. And I feel this whole idea of being authentic, you know, being enough, you know, are you really Indian? Are you really English? Are you really this? Are you really that? And certainly along with the history of colonialism and the oppression has a definite shape to it. But along with that, I feel this this requirement to belong is, I mean, it's a need. You know, we all need to belong somewhere. But the challenge I find is that belonging also has this really dark underbelly, and that in order to belong, you have to maybe what you mentioned. You commented, Ravi, about expectations being put on this certain voice, you know, and so that's what I struggle with, you know. I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate here, but it's. Well, I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah. Maybe part of it also is that belonging is also precipitated on exclusion, right? I mean, any nature of belonging means that you also are excluding others. But Faye, I mean, I know this is a little bit different conversation, but I'm also really want to hear about the Little Brown podcast. But I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts, and especially coming from the Philippines, where there is there are own pressures to conform, right? Or otherwise.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is quite relatable. The feeling of having to prove your identity and having to be put on the spot and perform an identity that suits the context or suits the audience or suits whoever is watching. The podcast that we did or that we were doing was dedicated to exploring the ways in which colonialism has made us has made us to perform this indigenous identity and has made us to prove that we were indigenous enough, which, you know, which fails, which is like a defeatist kind of journey, because you are trying to you're trying to conform to the standards of the colonizer. You're trying to conform to the standards of the ideal, the essential indigenous person, which doesn't exist, which is a colonial invention. And so the podcast is trying to like navigate like what is your identity and how do you define it and how do you see yourself, how do you become part of a community without having this pressure to be something else or to be what was taught that you were supposed to.
Rolando, want to say anything about this?
Right. I think it's always a matter of being. It's also a matter of being neither here nor there kind of positionality. When I was in the U.S. studying, or partly as a kind of visiting teacher else in the U.S. and elsewhere, you neither fit. You know, you're a second class citizen in that country, even though you assert, of course, a kind of equality and equal treatment. There's always going to be, at least from the phone talks, conversation with various personnel. It's always wanting them wanting you to enunciate more properly. So here I'm Roland. I'm Roland. There I'm Roland. I have to roll my R's and O's in order for me to be understood. And those kinds of simple gestures were in. There's a kind. You have to adjust also in order to fit in that kind of society. And when I came back, there's also kind of especially after long years of studying the U.S. There's also kind of exclusivity or non-inclusivity into the former circles that I used to, at least initially, because I seem not to be fitted, and I yet also exasperated with small things that otherwise would not have been a big issue if it had been a situation in the US or in Japan where there's a kind of efficiency in public transportation and in the educational system, bureaucracy, etc. So even up to now in the pandemic era, wherein I'm still able to converse with friends abroad, there's this kind of envy also for things that are not in place in the kind of health situation that should be in the Philippines. Whereas them, at least you in the US, and probably even though it's locked down in Australia, there's a bit more flexibility for individuality and individual health concerns to be addressed with the public health system, etc. Here, it's really individual effort to be able to have recourses in this kinds of in the daily needs, and especially in kinds of individual health emergency one may fall into during this pandemic lockdown. So we've been in the lockdown. We've been in our own houses for more than a year already, and nearing 2 years in March next year. So it's that kind of situation where we wish we weren't here. And we can only wish that we weren't here if we had been elsewhere, and likely it's in places and circles where we had formed communities and friendships in the U.S. And in Japan, or those kinds of things.
Well, yes, thank you for that. It's interesting to note that we move from this bicultural conversation back to what is happening with the pandemic and a lot of the structural deficiencies that exist around the world. I'm just also I noticed people are putting in some comments. So there is confirmation from the New York Writers Workshop, immersive writer, if in fact we are able to open up more fully, happening in Athens in May. And so New York Writers Workshop will list that, including great faculty Kim Adanizio, the Italian translators Maura Egan, Damiana Abene, Vasilis, great Greek poet. So that's out there. And then Liz mentions that Sridevi Iyer and Jason Lee have apparently just written an essay about this idea of being bicultural. And in fact, some of you may remember a guest from last month, Jaswinder Bolina, who has that terrific book Of Color. Some of the essays deal with this directly. So maybe you can tell us in terms of feeling more hopeful about the projects that you are working on now. And what I love about this conversation is that we have writers working in so many different disciplines, and some of you work in multiple disciplines yourself, and others are taking hiatuses from longer projects to do shorter projects. So what are you working on now? And maybe Faye, you want to start? Because I am so eager to hear about the podcast, especially. So maybe you can talk about that in addition to any your performance work, right? That is happening all the time.
Yeah. So the Little Brown podcast is forever on hiatus. No,
Oh, it is. Oh, it's like I'm getting my cue. I was ready for it.
It was so like it began when the pandemic, when lockdown started in the Philippines, and it was going on, and then three of the there are five hosts. Three of the five hosts are doing one's doing their masters, one's teaching, one's doing a PhD. It's a very hectic schedule for them, and it wouldn't feel the same without all of the hosts, without all of the voices. So we're trying to figure out how to continue. But the past episodes are still available, and we do have a lot of discussions that center around very different like experiences, because we have hosts from in the United States, and we have a host like who is in Hawaii, and we talk about like the movements that are happening there. But for now, so I'm working on a completely new collection of poetry that has more to do with like the conversations that I have with my mom about Indigenous identity and like the rituals that we had that we don't practice, and why is that? And my mom's Christian and my grandmother is an animist, so they're very like opposite sides of the globe basically. But it's like trying to navigate the differences between theirs, how they see spirituality and how they practice being, or how they be how they are Indigenous people, even though if it's like not practicing the rituals and traditions that we have. So yeah.
Wow, Faye, and that's a whole nother conversation, but I'd love to find out more about the beliefs in animism, right? I mean, this idea of a soul permeating much of the natural world, which somehow, makes a lot of sense in a certain way. Dev, do you want to talk about what you have on the horizon? What you're working on?
Sure. Well, I actually premiered Secret Asian Man last month. And I'll be performing it next month here, local performance here in Jamaica Plain. And also, what's a big part of my theatre work is And Still We Rise, sort of leading the actors who have all been affected by the prison system, and to lead them through a process to translate their life experience into plays that we share with the world. I'm so impressed by the intentionality in this group, how to reach out to the world and to give the world a shape and a doorway and a window into things. And the thing that strikes me is how how fluid I feel around all of this work. I feel tentative about it. I feel that these questions are reminders not to stay too long in what you think you know, or personally, not to stay too long in what I think I know. And in a way, that's what I want to get across to people. So it's less about giving hope, but rather reminding us that whatever you think you know, I mean, this sounds kind of outrageous. I don't think anymore.
Wait, I think we lost you right at the pivotal moment, Deb. What was the outrageous thing? It was as if the internet said, no, don't say it.
Yeah, I can't handle it, man. I said it's an outrageous statement, but knowledge is death. Once you know, you stop thinking and you stop.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want to get across with my work.
Yeah. And
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, there's a lot of overly rigidified thinking. I think many of our problems could be attributed to that. If there were more fluidity, maybe there could be more dialogue and
Well, I mean, it's also, it's a developmental thing. You know, I teach a lot, and as a teacher, I have to sort of make the subject static so that, you know, we can just examine it for a bit. But we can't, we have to, I have to constantly remind my students that what we're doing right now is just it's just a tool so we can get started. But this is not reality. This is not what it is. You know, and then we do, so, and that's the challenge, because we have to do this. We have to, you know, static things to know. We have to know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, maybe Rolando, you want to answer that? Because you obviously, as a film professor and a dean, have taught for long periods. I mean, what is your sense? And also, I mean, I want to know, of course, what you're working on, because you're always involved in a lot of different projects.
I'm working on as an issue editor of an online journal, De Ex Machina, which is a journal of Philippine literature in the time of COVID-19. Volume 3, meaning it's already in the third run. And we are happy to be able to collect and publish writing at the moment the pandemic is happening, and at the moment the pandemic lockdown is still being negotiated by Filipinos and Filipino writers. So we have published substantial works, poetry, fiction, especially essays, personal essays, which we really like. So frontliners, journalists being afflicted with COVID-19, we featured them in the past 2 volumes. I'm also part of the administrator of 2 groups, Facebook groups in base here. One is Tugon, which is a kind of creative responses of writers and artists, which synthesizes what writers and artists are doing in the time of pandemic. And also webinars that are being offered that may be suitable for writers or sponsored by writers and artists. There's another group which I co-administer. It's called Latag. And these are focused on images and videos of the everyday, which do not land in our online news outfits in this country. So it's providing alternative spaces, which I'm trying to do, and a lot of people are trying to do here, which because of the lockdown, we're not able to have any, to engage in our usual sociality and face-to-face, even with limited groups, for fear of now it's a Delta variant that's afflicting a lot of people. And of course, I teach, and teaching is kind of, because it's still online up to this time, and there's no news when it's going to be face-to-face. No? I think the Philippines and one other countries are the only 2 countries which have not which have not reverted back to the kind of old normal of teaching. So we're still engaged in online primarily 100%. And this has been disconcerting because the first 2 rounds of our engagements were not really too successful because still no one was prepared to do 100% online teaching. And then probably because it's a 4th semester, we're doing this. There's a kind of still grappling through of the possibilities out there, and more of a conversation happening with the students rather than a usual recitation or have you read all the readings, etc. It's a more of a conversation just to put everyone in a kind of comfortable place that this is a safe space from the actual social reality that we're all afflicted in and we're all embroiled in, which primarily does not allow us to go outside our homes. Those kinds of grappling issues, and it's all work in progress, and somehow some of them prove to be successful, others not too successful, but still there's no other way but to just struggle with it every day and learn from things and then move on to what can be doable for the rest of the semester.
Right. Yes. I mean, that's kind of the paradox. Knowledge is death, and knowledge is also life, right? The kind of Zen koan in some ways. And so in the pandemic, how are we negotiating that? And we could maybe move to Tanya, because you teach, and of course you had a lot of success with your novel, The Tusk That Did the Damage, which everyone should go out and get, which kind of tells the story of the ivory trade through the eyes of a poacher. Very inventive. What are you working on now? Are you doing kind of short stories, or are you working on a longer project? And how does that interface with your teaching?
I am working on a novel. I think I'm at the point in the process, which I don't know, in the beginning of writing a novel, I feel like there's a lot of hope and nerves, and because it can be anything, like a zombie could show up or anything could happen. Mm-hmm. And then you make progress, and by the end, many more doors are closing. It just is, the thing is what it's going to be. And so there's something kind of sad about that, not because I'm just in love with the world and need to be there still, but because there's something so fun about that state where there's just questions have yet to be answered. But I'm still in the revision process, which is most of the process. But I'm sort of doing late revisions where I'm trying to open up places that feel like I could open some more caves of consciousness with certain characters, to borrow a phrase from Virginia Woolf, like to sort of think more deeply about who characters are and what they really are, some of their complexities or something, and trying to open up spaces. But I feel like it's mainly kind of reached its inevitable kind of, like what it is now is probably pretty close to what it will be. So I'm a little bit, it's a kind of weird place, because it's, as much as I complain when I'm writing a novel, it's a kind of home for my brain for an extended period. And then you're kind of cast out again. And, but I'm hoping to write short stories or get back into short things. I love the short form.
And do you write flash at all, even shorter, or?
I do. I mean, I never did before. I never thought about it when I was in grad school. It just wasn't even a thing that was taught. I don't even know. Yeah, I really only started thinking about flash in part because I was teaching, to the part of your question, because a lot of my students write flash. I mean, part of it is just practical, because it takes so much time to write a short story and then get it published. And in part they kind of want a byline. They kind of want some kind of to go out to agents or whatever. And I never knew this, but like no one gave me this advice in grad school or anything, because we weren't allowed to talk about publishing. Like that was not a thing. I don't know if that was your experience, Ravi, but like we didn't talk about publishing. But my students are much more savvy than I was. And they kind of, flash fiction doesn't necessarily take as long. It probably doesn't take that long. And then you can like send it out, and you can, feel like you're submitting and part of that process. And so I really, it was through teaching and kind of discovering my students' taste for flash fiction that got me reading flash fiction. Then I was like, oh, this is amazing. And how you can, the kind of sharp focus, the kind of strangeness, the negative spaces. I really love flash fiction now. Yeah.
There's actually a journal called Brevity, which is short creative nonfiction, which is really good too. No, I mean, I was at Columbia in the late 90s, and Richard Howard, who taught there, was also the poetry editor of the Paris Review. And it was still a time when agents would give the fiction writers, I was a poet, of course, come in and they would get 6-figure book deals at their thesis readings. A very different time, I think, in publishing.
Can I just interrupt and say that you were really important to me, because I mean, I would see your name and read your poems, and I just didn't know that many South Asian American writers, period, or, like people who are publishing. And I just was like, I would just follow you and your poem. It just meant a lot to me at that time.
Wow.
So it's really cool to be back.
Yeah, I should say, when I was just starting out, I had connected with Mina Alexander and also the late Rita Kavazarani, who was actually really helpful in mentoring me. She went to the University of Virginia. But yes, to hear his to mentorship and having more voices to explode the literary canon. And Adam, when I think about your work, I mean, I think I have a book of yours, Letters to Marco Polo.
Oh yeah,
from the
yeah,
1980s sometime. And you have also, I mean, I put in the chat 100 letters. I thought it was really masterful. I really enjoyed that. And now you're back onto poems. They're always, I find, when a book is about to come out, like I have my memoir coming out, and there's a little bit of lull in the creative process as you're ramping up with the promotion, even though my mind is really shifting onto other things. Where are you, Adam?
Well, I did have before COVID, I was planning to go back to France. So my wife and I are able to live in a house in France for extended periods. But I had a project. I was going to read some archives about the Vietnamese refugees who came to France after the Indo-Chinese War. It's obviously I'm obsessed by the archive, and I learned a bit about writing archival literature or writing using the archive when I was at Hawaii with Susan Schultz. And so for me, the fact that it's a memoir, it's not the genre memoir versus poetry. It's the trace of stories. I mean, I seem to be very backward looking these days. Everyone else is looking at the present, but I'm kind of, one part of that is that in this village in France where we live, it's very secretive, and it's actually, no one wants to talk about anything controversial like the war. It also happens to be a really right-wing kind of part of France. So I'm quite fascinated in being a kind of spy and seeing what these reactionary French people in the regions are really thinking about people like me. So, so I go around. Sometimes I say I'm British, and sometimes I say I'm Australian. It depends. Sometimes I say I don't admit who I am. Anyway, I just want to get knowledge. And also in France, there's this lovely fascination with local history, the history at the local level, village histories. There was a village historian, archaeologists. All of that in Europe really fascinates me, not just France. So I'm actually learning French I've been learning French for 10 years. I'm just trying to, like Dev said, it's always better to go into something you don't really know much about and see what happens,
Yeah. And of course, Revenant comes out with Giramondo. I think you're with Vagabond, so that's a...
we're very, we're very, we don't belong in horse stables in Australia. We, it's everyone knows each other, and there's not really that much clubbiness. It's just, we're very lucky, some of us, that we can get any publishing done with a press. Not many around, You've got
wonderful. We'll look forward to that. And I should just say, we just have a couple of isolation breaks left. I think next month, Sweet Davy Iyer, APWT board member, is going to host a RMIT showcase, University in Melbourne. And then the final one in November will be a memoir showcase, actually, which is, of course, that's I'm of course promoting. Which is available for pre-order. I've just started doing events, and it's been some really positive feedback and very interesting conversations that have arisen. So, I'm excited, terrified, relieved to be having that out in the world. And I'm just looking at the clock. I cannot believe that this has been an hour and a half. You have flown by. This has been so much fun. And I think in the great grand tradition of isolation breaks, we like to go around and have everyone give us the little fortune cookie at the end of the delicious meal. And so whatever you want to leave us with, if it's something that you're reading, a call to action, something that you're thinking about, or that you're energized by a good Netflix show we should watch, whatever it is, leave it up to you. And maybe Rolando, you can start this time.
I'll just repeat what I said in my introduction, or what I excerpt from what I've read. which is really a call to all Filipino writers and probably to everyone in this writers and artists in the very restrictive conditions of the lockdown. Magsulat, lumikha, makibakaw, wag matakot. Dare to write, dare to struggle, dare to create, dare to win.
Thank you so much, Rolando. Adam?
Yeah, it's actually echoing Bertolt Brecht, who said something like, first comes food and then you do stuff. I can't remember what it is in German, but someone was lamenting the fact that in lockdown it's really hard to be a poet or something, and I replied saying, well, that's the job. The job of the poet is make sure you get food and drink, and then your job is to record what you see and feel in the world. And I hang on to that, and that keeps me going.
Yeah.
Luckily, I've got the food. I'm lucky enough to get food and drink and shelter, and I don't ever forget people who don't have that.
Yeah.
But if they don't have it, I will record that and be a witness. I very much believe in writing as a witness, as being truth. Writing to truth is very important to me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Even though I love fiction, but I won't go there.
Yeah, I think Brecht too said food first and then morality.
Oh yeah, morality. Yeah,
Morality.
Forget about it. Okay.
Yeah, not even aesthetics, but morality. Thank you, Adam. It's so great to hear your poems and to have you. Tanya?
Those were both really amazing. So this is going to bring this quality of this event down a notch. But I'm with my kids, my in-laws and my all the cousins running around, and I'm going to bring it to the level of Pixar. You can probably hear them in the background. We were watching Luca, the movie Luca, and there's this character who says, who's trying to tell the younger boy character. They're two boys and they're friends. And he's like, whenever you hear something in yourself say you can't do something, you just tell that negative voice, "Silencio, Bruno," and it means silence, Bruno. He calls that negativity, Bruno. And so I feel like even that's a Pixar film. I'm like, I actually need to sometimes. My Bruno gets a little too loud when I'm editing or writing, and so there's my.
I like that. Silencio, Bruno.
Yeah.
Okay. Faye?
Those are like really great insights. So I'm going to echo most of what Rolando has been sharing, that I think for writers, for creatives, for people out there in the world who feel like they've been put at the standstill because of the lockdown, the job of a creative, the job of a writer, a poet, an artist is to imagine a world that is completely possible. And this gathering now shows us that this world is entirely possible and we have to fight for it. So thank you.
Thank you, Faye. And Dev?
Oh gosh. Well, Adam reminded me of another very short poem by Brecht where he says, in the dark times, we will sing about the dark times.
Ah, yeah.
So it's our job, man. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And I guess what I want to say is never forget that we are all connected. That we are all together in this, and that we rise and fall together. That's the name of the company I run, and still we rise. The we, man. It's all about the we.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
That's great. That really does tie things together. I will just say, as a little news item, I'm sure some of you have seen, but this Instagrammer influencer, Gabby Petito, went missing, and in that same area, over nearly 700 indigenous women have also gone missing. The names of whom and the stories of whom we don't know at all. Right. And so, it is kind of up to us to change the conversations. I think this is a really great example of that. And so I want to thank all of you. And we've had a very healthy audience, and I'm sure many more people. This will be archived on YouTube. So I want to thank all of you for spending some time, your mornings and your evenings with us. I have been Ravi Shankar. This is ISOBREAK 13, Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and New York Writers Workshop, and Choose Center Collaborative for this month. Thank you all. This has been very sustaining. So stay safe and look forward to following what you all do. Take care, everyone.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.